What's happening? This is 9/11, and you are tuned in to AVG Podcast. As always, you know how we do it. Let's get to it. So today, I am very honored to have some of the direct lineage of a comedian, activist, and nutritionist legend, but also an astute businessman and entrepreneur in his own right, Dr. Christian Gregory. How you doing tonight? How are you?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And I'm applauding you, my dear brother. I'm doing absolutely excellent. Thank you for having me on AVG. I know we've been trying to connect and make this happen and
Long time
facilitate this
coming.
bit,
Yeah.
but it's all divine. It all happens when it's supposed to. So
Yes,
it's an
sir.
honor to join you here. And you know, I spent a tremendous amount of time in Dallas these days, so just seeing your hat's making a brother smile.
Look, I'm a Louisiana guy, but like my dad, he raised me on them Cowboys, so I'm a diehard fan. It just didn't happen with the move.
Love it. So good. Smart man. Smart man.
Yes, sir. So how's everything been going? Like you say, I know we've been trying to connect for a while. How's life treating you?
Life is, again, thank you for asking. Life is going incredibly well. And, you know, that would, at any stage or any point in my life, if you asked me that, I would have the exact same response because, you know, life is just such a blessing. And we take for granted because we live here in a nation of, you know, abundance. And so, and I know that doesn't, it's not homogenized abundance that everyone gets it equally, but there's still a lot, relatively speaking.
Yes, sir.
And as we're seeing all the pain and hurt all over the world, there's so many blessings to be grateful. So I always accentuate the positive. It's a true honor to join you on accomplish, visualize goals. And, you know, I'm all about, you know, visualization. My dad, Dick Gregory, raised us on that. And so you have to see it and manifest it in order to achieve it. So,
yes, sir.
You know, this podcast aligns beautifully with, you know, the foundational pillars that I was raised on, Avery.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, it embodies it. When I was going through the information you sent me and I was just looking at, especially the document, and we'll get into it because we're going to start a little further back, but it just embodies what I try to encompass. I always try to push forth, you know, a positive narrative with our people and show us in more of a positive light. We have so many platforms that tear each other down, you know, so I was like, hey, this is a lane here that I think needs to be tapped more into.
Smart. And I agree wholeheartedly. And it's bigger than just, no, this is a movement. And with all movements, it's collective activity that helps us to scale. So everyone does their part, that ripple effect builds, but positivity is contagious. It feels good. And you don't have a whole lot of folks dying over being positive. So it helps to be the lens that we see life through, one that's motivational towards others, but most important, motivational towards ourselves, because it's hard for us to do good for others when we don't take good care of ourselves.
Very true, very true. So we're gonna get into the interview a little bit, and we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna kind of start back to the beginning. Micro perspective. My dad, I think I mentioned to you the other night, he was a well-known preacher around the town, and he did a lot for youth ministry, coached and refereed his entire life until he just couldn't do it anymore. So me being his son, it was a little different moving around the city. Well, that's Reverend Dupart's son, you know. So I know at micro that pressure. So I wanted to ask you macro. When I said son of a legend, I know you guys can see the resemblance once I post this, but macro wise, being a son of Dick Gregory, what was that like growing up?
You know what? It's a great question, Avery. And obviously it's not the first time that any of, you know, there's 10 of us Gregory children. And so part of the strength was in such a strong nuclear family. I'm one of the babies. I'm number 8. So I had a lot of little mini role models to look after. 7 sisters, which means I had 8 mothers. So, you know, like a duckling, that guy along. So whether it was going to college or whatever else, I had seen so many people, and more than what our parents kind of tell us, it's what we see. And so since I was able to see successful patterns, you know, rinse and repeat, for me, that question, which is a great question, would probably be a little different from some of my older siblings, but being one, so I'm number 8. My sister after me, Ayana's number 9, and my brother Johante's number 10. Gotcha. We were the 3 little guys, so we were always, you know, almost over cared for. So I can tell you this, that lens, that microscope that you mentioned, was a blessing. It helped us to really, there's so many things, especially in youth, that we can get caught up in not seeing things clearly. Brain hasn't fully developed yet. Decisions are not always the wisest. So big family and the environment. We grew up on an organic vegan farm in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So, a lot of the stupid things I did, I broke a lot of bones, burned myself quite a bit, cut myself quite a bit, but it was, self-on self-crime.
Yeah.
Wasn't out there being a knucklehead with other folks other than, with 10 siblings, we always had a perfect 5-on-5 for everything. There was no TVs in the home. We didn't have TV. So this was, pre-internet, pre-computer, pre-social media. So, we ran all day long. We were active, playing, climbing trees, playing
wholesome
sports.
fun.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've traveled all over the world with my dad, and some of the happiest folks I've ever seen had the least. And so, they had food, shelter, clothing, but I've seen folks kick cans around literally, or balls of rags, and have more joy than I've seen folks with $10,000 worth of toys in their bedroom. So it helped me to understand that joy is above, down, inside out. It's not things that we touch and play and have in our life. And having, such a large, loving family, and then such a dynamic mother and father, it really helped us. So now, Lord, since I was 8 years old, now let me finish this statement, I've been arrested. So I had a very long rap sheet, but that was the rap sheet that all of us Gregorys had traveling around the South, and civil disobedience. So I was 8 years old with little zip tie handcuffs on. That also too helped me to behave, because I saw the ramifications if I went afoul. And it also helped me because happening as an activist in the family of activists, and under that protective kind of umbrella of, a father that was bigger than life. And even though we were being arrested, folks knew to be, exceptionally gentle with the Gregory children. 100% not fair, but the reality on the ground. It allowed me to calibrate things and leave and go down to environments where there were people who were very hostile towards me, but would come back to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and many of those same, the people that looked just like that were my best friends and classmates and parents of my best friends. So it helped me to understand that it's a lot deeper than race. And as my dad would often say, race is about attitude, not racism, but race is about attitude, and it's cultural, and it's vibration. And it, from a very young age, and as we see a lot of, and not to get ahead of your question in here, everybody, as we see a lot of the ills in the world today, so often defined along racial lines, it helps me to be able to calibrate it properly and understand the importance of positive energy. And my dad would always say, information is power. Good information is good power. Bad information is bad power. So now we have all of these platforms like we're connecting right now, where we can spread good information. And man, this is all digital. This is all going to be on mainframe stored and in the cloud and the metaverse and spatial computing. Long after you and I are gone, the positivity of these messages will outlive us all. And so it's you never know how far reaching something you do or say today will be tomorrow. And it's a true blessing to connect and discuss and be of service.
Yes, sir. I like that answer. I like that. Now, you touched on the activism part of your dad's life, and I wanted to kind of talk about that, start there a little bit, because I noticed in the movie, he started off, I think, was with the Playboy Club, right? And I noticed in his material, even early on, he was already pushing the envelope. So it's like the activism part was already activated, but it just hadn't been put in the right setting yet. He performed, I think it was a club, I think full of Southerners. I think they had rented out the club that night, and Hugh Hefner didn't want to let him go on or reduce his time on. And he got up there and did his full. The very first thing I noticed when watching it, because I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't. The very first thing I noticed was his courage to get up there and present his message without a blink of an eye. and get up there and still take over the room in that time frame. Because now we think about it now, it's not as taboo. Well, it's not taboo at all. That's what comedians do. They make people uncomfortable. They push the envelope, or they redraw the line wherever it was set before. So they try to push that envelope. But where he etched that line at that time in history, to me, I was taken back. So just, can you speak on his courage and how did that kind of run through the family and what y'all had to deal with during that time frame?
Great point. I want to point out that, and just over my back here, you can see the movie poster for the one and only Dick Gregory. So that's the movie that we're discussing. It's the one of multiple films we're doing that capture like my father's life story. The one and only Dick Gregory, Emmy nominated, available on Showtime platform, pretty much available now on all of the streamers. And so we encourage people to watch it. And for me, as one of the Gregory 10 children, one of the hardest things someone could ever ask us is, what does your father do? Because he did so much. There was no simple capsular response. And so now I can point people, say, well, go check that out. Then we can talk about it on the backside. So we're doing, Joe Morton has a one-man play, Turn Me Loose, based on my dad's life story, produced by John Legend. Kevin Hart there's another project so this was done with Kevin Hart's Heartbeat. We have another two-part documentary. The first part's primarily about Dick Gregory, called Right to Offend. That's available on A&E Network. And Kevin Hart also is in some degrees of pre-production in Dick Gregory biopic. And so my dad's life was so chock full of activity, of service, I should say, not just activity, but service, service for Black folks, certainly, and service for humanity. My dad was a vegan early on because he didn't want to be violent towards animals. So it's difficult in a 2-hour, my dad had 16 books, 20 albums. And so it's difficult to get all that into your standard kind of biopic. And so, or even documentary. So what you saw, which was a lot, is really probably only about 20% of my dad's life that's captured in that film. So I'm excited. Many of these, exceptional program I'm a producer on, and I'm not excited because I'm producer. I'm excited because it's a high honor to be able to capture and tell my father's story in a way that I know future generations will be impacted, will serve them as well, will be impacted and can understand that serving humanity and helping those with the least amongst us is profoundly important. And it does take, to your point, it does take a tremendous amount of courage. And my dad's courage, and I only know this for a fact because he's talked about it so freely, it really came from how he was raised. I mean, born in 1932, that was literally the poorest year of the Great Depression. So we're dealing with the Great Depression. We're dealing with the Jim Crow laws of the South. White men or a white person walking down the sidewalk, Black folks had to step to the side and look down. And so we often, in talking to young folks, they think that was so incredibly long ago. They don't realize that we're not that far removed from it. We still have a tremendous amount of work to do. And I think sometimes we can look through all of the abundance we have today and not quite calibrate how hard what those activists and courageous leaders, even before they became to define themselves as an activist, what they were doing and how strong it was. To not step out of the sidewalk for a white person could be a death sentence, or it could be a major courageous act that was that one little ripple that started to bring about change. So for my father and his courage, it really was more spiritual first for him. I mean, it was, he literally was, grew up starving. I mean, there's food insecurity, which means I don't know where my next meal will come from, or I don't know where my meals will come from next week. That's more psychological and very dramatic. But it's almost a luxury item for someone who's starving. It's I'm not even thinking about my next meal. I don't have this meal. due to the fact that my dad was so, chronically dealt with chronic hunger and was chronically skinny back then this would have been the 40s for black children in St. Louis. If they were skinny, they automatically assumed they had tuberculosis. So they sent them to schools for children who had disabilities. So most of my dad's middle school years were sent with children who, couldn't see, were handicapped, missing a limb. So it connected him on a spiritual level to say, wait a minute, here I am going home hungry, but I can see, I can hear, I have all, of sound body and mind. So it really helped him to calibrate and not get caught up on what he didn't have, which was profound.
Yes,
and
yes.
us would have been caught up on it. He explained it as he dealt with hunger so regularly that hunger became his best friend. And by befriending hunger, it didn't make him uncomfortable. Fact.
You got it? You there?
Perfect. People didn't realize when he was later in life going on hunger strikes in the Vietnam War, people didn't realize how comfortable he was not eating. Food was something that was always in awkward engagement for my father. If anyone's ever spent time at a dinner table with Dick Gregory, especially at various points in his life, he would insist no food. He would take out 20 different capsules. He'd open his capsules up into water. He was creating elixirs and energy drinks and all of these things on his own because he understood nutrition out of desperation, because he had to figure out a way, especially when he got a little older, became an athlete, and became an outstanding runner. He had to figure out a way to compete with folks who were going and eating 3 full meals every day, and how he could be, malnourished basically and still compete on a higher level. So that courage for him, and I know that was a long answer to your question, but that courage from him, it came young. It came very young. And he tells stories of his mother, my grandmother, Lucille Gregory, explaining to him that there was a young people who would see him saw almost a star on his forehead, that there was something that was unique and special. We say this about a lot of kids, but to go back and talk to a lot of my other family members and hear them either say it now or say it recorded earlier in their lives, and kind of co-sign that story, and also say it was obvious at a very young age that, Dick Gregory beat to as they call him back there, Richard or Little Richard, beat to a different drum. And so he was one of the most courageous brothers I've ever met in my life, and that courage went through the full life cycle. A lot of people are courageous at one point, then they have a mortgage, they're married, they have to start. Some of that courage has to, and I don't judge that. It's responsible.
Oh, yeah.
But that was never, he made it very clear to my mother and to my siblings that the civil rights movement came before her and came before us. And that's just how unyielding his undying devotion was to back then, what they just simply called the movement. And that movement went on to revolutionize the world, quite honestly. When you go back and look at it with, with pure intentions and look at the totality of it, what the civil rights movement was able to do is a movement it's really a form of warfare, almost psychological warfare, that people don't understand because it's counterintuitive. If someone hits you, the response is to immediately respond. And it's easy to justify, oh, he's an animal, he's this, he's a horrible human being, if they can keep provoking you. When you can't provoke someone, and we're seeing that now around the world on both micro and macro levels. And
very much so.
we have a long ways to go, but to not acknowledge the progress that my dad saw in his
Yes,
lifetime
sir.
would be a disservice to how many of those did not survive it, or they survived it with scars, psychological and physical scars. So do we have a tremendous way to go? Absolutely. But we
Absolutely.
have to acknowledge how far we've come and acknowledge that sacrifice.
Yes, and that was the second word I was going to use to describe your father, because see, a lot of, like you say, I don't fault anybody now for once they get in a certain position, some people have to protect brands, and some people, they have to protect an image that once they get out there to a certain level, depending on who's backing them or whatever. But the other word I was going to use to describe your father was sacrifice. I noticed in the documentary when he got to a certain level and was making so, when I think it was Medgar Evers that called him down, and he, when I say cut it cold turkey, didn't, like you said, didn't think about mortgage. Then the only other athlete, well, not athlete, but the only other person of his stature that I can think of that ought to made a sacrifice that big was like Muhammad Ali at the peak of his career, and what he did and how he just walked away from boxing because he went to jail or whatever. But they put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and let you know this is truly, I'm standing on something I truly believe in, and I will not be shaken by anything else or deterred by anything else that's going on in this world, because this is a purpose that I truly believe in, and I'm gonna move forward with this.
It was rare. It's not as rare today because you pointed this out, because we're all individual brands now, and now you can make your brand. You can still, and I don't, whether it's an actor, singer, rapper, professional athlete, or just a doctor or a lawyer, you can straddle. You can, because of social media and other things, you don't have to sacrifice your livelihood in order to become an activist. Back in the 60s, Dick Gregory didn't have that. And so in 1960 to 61, 62, my father was the number one entertainer in the world, black or white. He was the highest entertainer. And you're right. So it's good to see, Avery, you definitely took good notes and paid attention during the documentary. Medgar Evers called, and Medgar was a retired sergeant. I believe it was the Korean War. But he was used to motivating people, and he was also fearless. And that balance, Dad at that point in his life was around a lot of powerful folks, a lot of wealthy folks, a lot of black folks and white folks who were doing well for themselves, living in Chicago. But every time he turned on the TV or picked up a newspaper, he saw how horrible things were for folks down south. So when Medgar called, he didn't bat an eye, but he did think he was just going to go down to prove he was committed and come right back. Yeah. And the thing about a movement, if you've been around, there's all kind of movements in life. They can draw you in. That's a blender. You don't turn it on, it's nothing. Once you turn it on, you get that movement. Everything gets drawn into that cylinder.
Something ignites you.
Exactly. So that what he saw in Medgar was a type of fearlessness, not recklessness, but fearlessness that he had never seen before, and it intrigued him. And Medgar Evers was the model for the activist and soldier, because my dad considered himself a soldier, and soldiers sacrifice. They sacrifice time with I don't need to tell you this, they sacrifice time with their family, they sacrifice their minds and bodies. And so that sacrifice, my dad was 84 when he passed away, and he was still giving and sacrificing all the way up into the end, and he would have had it no other way. And so I want to back up for a moment, because I realized we talked briefly about the Playboy Club, but back in the 60s, the Playboy Club was really the largest stage you could ever step onto, for not just for a comedian, but any entertainer.
Anybody, yeah.
And so there were a lot of entertainers, there were a lot of black comedians that, always, that predated Dick Gregory for certain. They always wore large, ill-fitting clothing, exaggerated makeup, exaggerated facial expressions. No matter how intelligent they were, and many of them were very intelligent, they had to dumb it down, because the dumb Negro was the shtick. That's what white folks came to see.
They was comfortable with.
And that's what they were comfortable with, because it fit their stereotype. So for Dick Gregory, who was a topical comedian, flat-footed comedian, meaning brought a stool out, sat on stage, put both feet firmly on the ground, well-dressed. Back then, cigarettes, which everyone smoked, cigarette in hand, shot of whiskey in hand, and just sat and calmly talked to people very intelligently. Most of what he was discussing was from that day's paper, and many of the people in the audience didn't even have the depth and understanding and knowledge of this black man sitting up on stage talking about very highbrow topics that were going on around the world, domestically and internationally. And I don't spend a whole lot of time wondering how other communities responded to Dick Gregory, but for this group of Southerners that were booked, a Southern convention was booked at the Playboy Club that night, and Hugh Hefner got word of it. He had called back, say, "Hey, don't let Dick Gregory go on the stage not out of racism, but oh my God, Dick Gregory's a friend. I don't want him to be attacked." So he didn't know how deep Dick Gregory's skill sets were and how prepared he was for that audience. And the story is legendary now, but he was a catalyst for the modern day black comic you see today. And for my lifetime, you name the comedian, Richard Pryor, Bill Cosby, Eddie Murphy,
all off that tree.
Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, all of them, Kevin Hart, would get down on their knee and kiss my dad's hand, shake it, not out of some ego kiss the ring, but
just reverence.
That you busted that glass ceiling, you kicked open the door. You could have gone in and stayed in there and, got comfortable, but you never took your foot away from that door to keep it open for that pipeline of everyone else to keep coming through. And that pipeline really got open when my dad left comedy in 62, 63. It created a vacuum that brought up the Bill Cosbys of the world, the Richard Pryors of the world. Both of them will historically would quickly credit part of their success to Dick Gregory in his prime stepping out of the way and promoters saying, wait a minute, Dick Gregory's crazy. We got to find, he's walking away from all of this money. We got to find someone that's using his same topical humor and intellect to bring in for these audiences that were hungry for it at that point. So that led up to the moment of the Medgar Evers call. The Medgar Evers call wound up to my dad being fully immersed in the civil rights movement. Dr. King's nonviolent aspect of it is what led my dad to be a vegan. And I can honestly say, sitting and talking to you here now, of my dad's 16 books, one of the top sellers is Cooking with Mother Nature. And the amount of black, brown, and white folks who approach me and say, my family started clean eating. My family started eating organic foods or farming our own food or became vegan or vegetarian was because of one of your father's lectures or one of your father's cookbooks is profound. And that type of impact and change, nutrition is the catalyst for everything that evolves with the human body. And so those changes since the 60s and 70s, I am certain of the fact in the long run, when we look back at this in hindsight, there will be a deeper impact from Dick Gregory's nutritional revolution and explaining to people the importance of taking care of their body, physical fitness, drinking water, eating whole foods, plant-based foods, all the things that are buzzwords now. Man, Avery, I can tell you, in the 70s, being a vegan, you weren't treated well, man. There were restaurants that asked us to leave. And so to go to a restaurant and ask for, and basically all you got was just a plate of vegetables. And so an occasional French fry. So we rarely went out to eat because the reality is most folks didn't even understand what a vegan was. And now, fast forward now, you can't get away from it. Every restaurant, 5-star restaurants, most of them have vegan options. And now there's
chicken that look like vegan.
Stuff that are all vegan. So and now I want to be very clear as a retired healthcare provider, vegan is not synonymous with good for you. So it's important still do as a practitioner, a disproportionate number of my vegan patients were obese and sickly. So if I'm vegan and you're not getting good, healthy protein and all you're getting is carbs, the math on that is not good. And so my father had a a great line that he used to tell, that he was in New York City and he saw a brother with cocaine dust on his nose, heroin needle in his arm, and the brother said, "Hey, brother Dick." And he said, "Hey, my brother." He said, "Can I offer you an apple?" And the cat said, "But wait, is it organic?" And so sometimes we can play with this, I'm vegan, I'm vegetarian, organic. On its own, it is not synonymous with a healthy lifestyle. So these are things to aspire for. But a lot of my patients who were vegan and vegetarian, for whatever reason, metabolically, they had to go back and move away from some plant-based proteins. Back in the 70s, we thought soy was a great form of protein, only to later realize that it elevated estrogen levels on men. And, it's constant. What we know is that clean food, real food, if you pick up a label, you shouldn't have to have a degree in chemistry in order to pronounce the words on the label. And so a lot of what my father was doing was educating folks just to do better. You didn't have to do what Dick Gregory was doing, but just to do better. And this is an important part. My dad and I had a wonderful relationship. So obviously father and son. I was also one of his healthcare providers. We were business partners, best friends. So I had a relationship with Dad, obviously. I had a relationship with Dick Gregory, the entertainer, and I had a relation with Richard Claxton Gregory, who Dick Gregory was. So so frequently, when we were sitting in business environments, because we were business partners, I wouldn't say Dad or Pop, because we're business partners. And so sometimes people will hear me interviewed and hear me talk about, instead of saying my father or dad, or say Dick Gregory in a third person, is because our relationship
it's multifaceted, it's layered.
It's multifaceted and beautiful and complex and rich in a good way. And one of my first patient when I came out of chiropractic school was Stevie Wonder. Second patient was Cicely Tyson.
Wow.
And both of them are dear friends. And Cicely Tyson would always say to me, once an adult, twice a child. And so as our parents go through that second childhood, it's profoundly important to recognize it and surround them with dignity and grace and understanding. Sometimes they need a little helping hand, sometimes they don't. So that role reversal that my dad and I went through was such a beautiful thing, not for a celebrity, but for any parent and child. If we live long enough, we will most likely deal with with our grandparents and parents, some type of cognitive decline, physical decline, and literally the care they once gave us, we're now providing to them. And my dad passed away in 2017, and people hear me talking so much about Dick Gregory and this and that, they think, oh, this brother's really still struggling with his father's death. And when we lose a parent, that goes on in perpetuity. There's no
Band-Aid for that.
But for me, I just want to be abundantly clear. My talking about it and protecting his legacy is just still being in awe of the sacrifice in the body of work. My father had grown incredibly tired. I mean, he was ready to transition. And it's a beautiful thing when someone who saw most of their peers, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Dr. King, Fred Hampton, and so many others whose names we can't kind of roll call, died tragically and far too young through a white racist homicidal system that was just considered normal back then. So for my dad to be able to live to 84 years of age and go out on his own terms, and I'll say this, with age, there's chronological age that we talk about all the time. We don't talk enough about biological age. So Dick Gregory was 84 chronologically. Biologically, that brother was a good 110 years old. There was a lot of miles on that mind, body, and soul. That soldier had put a lot of work in.
Yes, indeed.
And so part of because I would never say 84, especially in this day and age, our generation, many of us are living longer than that, but it's quality of life. Sometimes we get too caught up in quantity. And so the week we lost my dad, he had 10 comedy shows set up that week. So he was still and part of the cognitive decline is why we had to pull him out of speaking at high schools and colleges. The language would sometimes
become a little too raw.
That's why he went back full on to comedy, because said you can say whatever you want. Even then, he was still in lecture mode. He was still in master teacher mode and leading by example. But it just the courage, which was your first point, the sacrifice. Those are the two
things
big
that stood
things
out.
that I've always that are synonymous with Dick Gregory, and I've always utilized to kind of tell his story.
And it was one thing I want to kind of backtrack on that you mentioned earlier. When he was doing early on, when he was rising through his comedic ranks, when he was talking about, I don't mind, like the Sambos and the stuff like that. He said, it's a place for that. But he said, let me see the intelligent Negro. Let me see him as a news anchor. Balance it out. And I brought that up to say, because I wanted to put together a panel called Musical Warfare, because I feel like our hip hop culture, I'm big on music. I love music. But I feel like our hip hop culture has been hijacked, so to speak, to all they put out is the negative imagery, even for our young ladies. You got songs that's just leading them blindly, and at 7, 8, they're doing dances and provocative things that it shouldn't even be in their mind at that point. But that is the image that's being pushed forward by the industry.
That's not by accident.
That's not by accident. That's why I say I wanted to call that panel musical warfare, because music is the quickest way to entice and enhance and just take over a brain, and before you know it, you're hypnotized. Powerful.
And it's the melody, but it's also the repetition. Everyone sings happy birthday, never because we read it on a piece of paper, but we grew up hearing it. If you hear something enough, it's programming. And it's important. That machine is so big. So the importance is to have counter programming. And the beautiful thing about today is that there's options. Where we grew up, man, had 2 radio stations that you could have listened to. Now there's so much diversity, and now you have to go out and get it, because the other ones find them.
Exactly.
So by design, it's going to find them. And then also, it's not enough just to insulate. You also have to see and know what's up there. So I have a lot of my patients and even some of my family members who don't give their, children, smartphones and computers and this. Well, that's like sending them to compete in sports without sneakers these days. Like, you have to have balance. And so,
very true.
And especially nowadays.
Especially now.
Some folks in our community say, we want to teach kids to write code. Well, now code writes code. We can't always be running behind this technological revolution. We have to embrace it.
Thanks.
And, the internet and these devices, now this is another door into our home. So we lock the front door, we lock the back door, we lock the garage, we lock the windows. Well, now we need to lock that too. So to allow your young children to have access to that untethered is like allowing them to walk in and out of the front door all night long with it open. So as parents, we have the responsibility to introduce things to them, allow them to see. It's like training wheels on a bike. Mm-hmm. We have to provide that until they prove themselves that they can handle. Because it's an awesome responsibility, man. And I'm not anti-technology. I can remember growing up, and again, we had no televisions in the home, no microwaves. But I go over friends' homes whose parents had microwaves, and a grandma would turn the microwave on, and everyone had to get out of the kitchen. They would clear everyone. Now, fast forward to 2024, grandma today will have the microwave on where their forehead resting on it while she's texting. So the technology has evolved, but part of it talks about the human spirit and evolution. That so many of these things that used to be toxic to us, and I'm not saying that's healthy or good, we've evolved and adapted to. And so if you were to go down in someone's garage and find you have an ant or a bug problem in your home, and you get a can of Raid from 1970, and you spray it on those bugs, man, they lick the nozzle and thank you for it, because the active ingredient in it is no longer active for them. Yeah. So we have to understand. So many times we say, we want to do it because it was. And I saw that when 5G came out. 5G, the boogeyman, 5. We have to be enlightened on what these things are and what it really is, because we're scaring our children. We're scaring our elders. Man, if our elders don't become more digitally in tune, they won't be able to order a pizza. They won't be able to order a taxi cab. I mean, a Lyft or an Uber. They won't be able to book a flight.
Nothing.
You will. I mean, we have augmented reality, alternative reality. We have spatial computing, which with Apple's new Vision is coming out in January or February. man, there's all these realms that soon you may have to go into, put on your spatial reality, to go in and get a mortgage on a home or to refinance. I mean, what the
Very much so.
pandemic did is it taught grandparents and parents all over the world how to do what we're doing right now. So they're going to Johnny's birthday party right through the
Right on the
screen.
screen.
So
Yeah.
we need to continue to embrace it. You got to have, we're mammals, 605 muscles, 202 bones. So we have to move, but we also have to understand that. And right now we're predicting within the next 10 years, there'll be folks as young as 60 years old who are basically disabled, and they're digitally disabled because they don't know. The amount of times my dad would call me from the airport because he jumped into a rental car and it didn't have a transmission, it had a button or a twist. It's imperative. And one more Cicely Tyson story. Cicely Tyson was a master on her handheld device. She could have 10 separate texting conversations going on at the same time. And it was just beautiful for me to see how important it is. And, you know, my dad never wanted a cell phone whatsoever. But what happened is he realized as he was traveling all over the world, payphones were disappearing. He couldn't check in. So he got a smartphone, which, you know, if we're honest, are not that smart. This is the real smartphone right here. This is just provides a digital load for us to download and store things, doing our critical thinking for us. But it would anger my mom so much because he would keep it. He never would turn it. He would turn it on, place a call, then turn it right back off.
Well, that sounds like my dad.
If he took the battery out, he would have took the battery out. So it's important that we understand technology, we embrace not just you and I, but our elders and also our young folks, that they have access to this, because most jobs in the future are not going to be anything like the jobs, as you know, as a retired military man, most of the warfare is not going to look anything like the warfare you saw in training. Exactly. So we have to evolve, because otherwise we get left behind. And it's so often, you know, you look at electric vehicles, we're far behind. We make fun of folks who are planning to go to Mars. And so would I rather see the disproportionate amount of that money go towards helping the hungry? There's far too many hungry folks in this country and abroad. But I also understand Earth is a spaceship. It's a spaceship that was not always, you know, kind and habitable by human beings. At some point, one wobble, one rotation, it may know. We've seen the Ice Age. There may become a time where it no longer sustains human life. And so to have a plan, and colonies are like mold. When mold grows in someone's basement, we call that a colony. And the only way mold grows in your basement, it stays in one basement, never moves, it can't survive. So it needs to get on your shoe and go to another home, go to another moist environment, so that mold colony can proliferate. And once that happens, you have stability in the DNA, the genetic matter that's in those mold spores, which we may find someday is the answer to cancer, or is the answer to, so that same, the mistake we make is thinking that humans are a master kind of species and we have more intelligence than everything else. And all you have to do is go back to the tsunami that hit Southeast Asia and see that, man, domestic animals were leaving 5 days before it hit. They were, a lot of folks have elephants that are chained up there. They were ripping up their steaks and leaving. Birds were leaving. So what is it about us that we're sitting on the beach doing this? All the animals that are dumb, quote unquote,
they getting out of Dodge.
And they're looking at us, looking at our little screens and saying, there's some true fools right there. And
For real.
It's important that we have that balance. When I have 16 nieces and nephews, countless godchildren, whenever I'm with them, I say, okay, right now, if something came over our devices and said, we need to head north or we need to head east, what direction are you going? Man, they're clueless. Unless they have their device, they're clueless. It's someday if the system goes down, the infrastructure goes down, we need to understand the full spectrum of survival and not be obsessed with it, but at least understand it so we can look out for each other if there ever is a glitch. And, you know, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So so all that to what you're doing. I love hearing what you're doing and what you're planning for the music panel. It's all educational. inspirational, and due to platforms like this, can be chopped up and sent to folks. All none of this is neighborhood by neighborhood. This is global. I mean, we're having these issues globally, different scales naturally. So kudos to you for doing that, Avery. And I think it's important, and it will provide a tool for others.
I appreciate that. I want to just tell before we move on, because I got about 15 minutes left, and I want to really drill down on the 3E energy drink and let you expand on that. But one of the quotes that your dad said that I see a lot of his traffic coming through the internet, but I like the quote about when the universe picks you and you put those glasses on, once you see things how it's supposed to be seen, you can't take them off. So I just wanted to tell you that that's one of my favorite things that I've heard him say that I think about.
That full quote, you can't take them off, but it's also not your responsibility to try to force everyone to put them on, because they're not for everyone. In our community, and my whole life, wherever I've been, I practice in Washington, D.C., what they call Chocolate City. So there's always been a deep level of gratitude and understanding and appreciation uniquely for our community. Education and power and information sometimes can become weaponized. It becomes something we compete with. Well, I know this and you don't, and because you don't know this, my brother, you are not understand. And it's not for, and my dad read, it's simple to say lead a horse to water, can't force it to drink. Well, the horse may realize the water's bad. So we can't beat the horse down and call it stupid, because it may realize something, hence the animals we were just discussing at the tsunami.
That animal instinct.
My dad would always say, to tell someone something once, you're doing them a service. To tell them more than once, you're doing them a disservice. And the example is, if I see someone smoking and I say, hey, my brother, smoking's bad for you. You shouldn't smoke. It does this to your lungs. It does this to done. I've done them a service. If I see them, if every time I say them, I say it again, now I'm offending them, because I'm assuming they're not intelligent enough to understand what I said the first time. And now I took, which was something that was constructive, and now I'm being disrespectful with it. Yes, we can be disrespectful with information. It's not for everyone. And there's things these folks know that we don't know. And so quote, and that's why I loved seeing, there's so many links of, I turn on YouTube trying to figure out what am I going to watch, and 20 Dick Gregory videos will pop up. And there's algorithms. Those of us who are watching it, we get more of it. But it's just beautiful to know that it's all out there. And hundreds of hours of archival footage do we have of my dad, hundreds of hours. And it's endless. You could spend damn near the rest of your life going through it. There's so much. Because all of the colleges and universities, they were all recording it on beta recorders, VHS. And so almost monthly, I get another batch of things that come in. And the beauty of it is, in my dad's 84 years of life, about 60 plus of those years, pretty much since he was 17 or 18, he had a camera in his face and was advocating. And he was really saying the same thing. His message grew and evolved, but it was still rooted in love for each other, humanity, being loving and lovable. He said, how is Super Bowl Sunday? There's more domestic violence incidents in America than any other day. The same people who love you can love you to life or love you to death. Not all love is appreciated love. And it's not enough, do you love me? Are you lovable? And so, someone can kick a dog and say they love it as they're doing it. Your behavior has to be lovable, which is equally as important of you. Some would say more so important than you loving something. And so my dad would always say, sometimes we get it backwards. We call our woman strong and our truck beautiful. He said, no, your truck is strong. Your woman is beautiful. And just the importance of understanding the softness of humanity, the understanding and the wisdom, and just sharing that and lifting we can't all be on the same level, but in a nation full of abundance, folks should not have to wonder where their next
the disparity shouldn't be that far off.
It should not be that far off. And so I like to believe that, humanity is working on things. I know for our part, you mentioned 3E a moment ago. A lot of what we're doing, my dad had this is a small original can of the Dick Gregory Bahamian diet. So my dad had his weight loss formula out in the 80s. And basically it was based on nutrient density and increased bioavailability. So at the end of the day, when we consume things, the point of consuming food is to get nutrients into the cells. And so if something has increased bioavailability, it means it gets a little easier. Typically it's alkaline and moves a little easier through the cell membrane and gets into the cell. Food's not for our stomach. That's just where it sits to get broke down and then sent out through our vascular system to get to every single cell in the body and nourish it. And so with what we're doing with 3E, which is all through Texas, we're like the number 2 selling energy drink in the HEB Central Market stores. And it's an energy elixir that is nutrient dense with increased bioavailability and all natural. And so right now, wave 1 of energy drinks was Red Bull and Monster. They use synthetic caffeine and they use sugar. They typically use some form of real sugar because sugar provides energy to the body. So wave 2, which most folks are consuming now, use synthetic caffeine, and they're sugar-free. And sugar-free is the biggest gimmick that has ever been, or one of the biggest that's ever, nutritional gimmicks for certain, that have been perpetuated and it continues to be perpetuated, but that has ever been played, because we should feel played by it on society. During this whole 0-calorie, sugar-free movement, we've seen obesity and diabetes just mushroom out of control. So folks are thinking, well, I'm drinking my Coke Zero, I'm drinking this. You know, sugar, especially if we're talking about organic sugar cane, even maple syrup, but most of them are like blackstrap molasses. Some of these are damn near superfoods that have so many nutrients in it.
Exactly.
So we should reduce the amount of sugar for certain, because we get it too many places. Other folks in other societies, not the case, but in America, we get too much sugar. And so we should limit the amount of sugar, but all sugar and all calories are certainly not created equal. So post-practice, I'm having the time of my life educating folks into, real calories, what's good for the body, and a whole calorie, and whole foods, real calories needs to be able to nourish the body, but it also still needs to be enough nutrients intact that when it gets down into the gut, it can also nourish our microbiome. So when we're eating, we're almost eating for two. We're eating for our body and our microbiome, and our microbiome is really our second brain. So that brain-gut connection, we're learning so much, and it's not new. It's just that we've been lied to. Someone has convinced us through slick Madison Avenue campaigns that we should run away from certain things. They did it, same thing with eggs. They did the same thing with butter. They did this, that go away. Real is always better.
Milk, everything.
It is always the better. So, and if you can get it, if you're someone that drinks milk, finding a local milk source is going to be better for milk that's been pasteurized, homogenized, and shipped all over the world. So we have to put some effort into it. Most of us put more effort into buying a new car and buying a home than we do to bringing a life into the world. And also, it's important to understand biochemical individuality. What's perfect for one person's medicine is another person's poison. So just because a particular diet or regimen worked for us, we can't say, oh, that should work for you too. That's the mistake with modern medicine. And that's why you see so many practitioners shifting over, MDs and DOs and chiropractors and nutritionists switching over to functional medicine, which is biochemical individuality. If 10 people have a cold, well, we shouldn't assume all 10 of them need the same reason and they all caught it for the same deficiencies. So it looks at each of us as an individual. And, we're coming off a vaccine heavy time. And a lot of people say, well, what would Dick Gregory do about the vaccine? I said, well, you clearly don't know Dick Gregory if you didn't have to ask me that question. But the second thing is, you can be anti this or a particular vaccine and not be anti-vaccine. But the problem, so I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I was an anti-particular vaccines, but there were people I would have gladly driven to go get vaccinated because they were eating the vaccine for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the fast food they were eating. I'm saying, you're eating everything that's in that vaccine you're consuming because the cheap meat you're eating has been vaccinated with that tenfold. So, you have to remove the politics of it and look at, our health. If me and you are together and a rabid raccoon comes in and bites both of us, yeah, I want to go get a rabies shot because I understand that math and that science. And I understand that doesn't typically play out well. So it's important because when we make things about politics, we miss it's complicated and we belittle it and we dumb it down. And unfortunately, it's folks in our community, a lot of folks in our community that didn't survive it because they had pre-existing ailments. And suddenly, again, that's the brother Dick, is it organic? That's the you've put garbage in the whole time, but now because of this, you want to try to wing it. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, he decided, I'd say we decided because we did it as a team, not to do chemotherapy or not to do radiation therapy. We did some other new non-traditional things. Long story, but he survived it. He was in remission for the rest of his life, some 25 plus years. But that was the only time I asked my dad not to do something. Literally one time in my whole life, I said, Pop, when we go on these radio shows, if people hear Dick Gregory saying, I'm anti-chemotherapy, I'm anti-radiation, then they're going to walk away from the treatment. Most of them are going to die because they're not haven't starved the cancer cells in their body. They're not doing all of the things that you're doing. And people take away the top line things and don't want to do the work. Well, no more chemo. Well, there's a trade-off. It's not one, it's not just don't do one. It's you don't do one because you're doing the other. And so the same would apply. This pandemic has impacted our community greater than others, and I think it's profoundly important. There'll be more. It's just the nature of where we are as a society. We're encroaching animals, natural habitats more. Too many folks playing around in labs. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And that's not the time you want to get healthy. Now, the best defense is a great offense. Now is the time you want to start taking care of your body and understanding how these things work so you can. It's hard to have informed consent when you're not informed on something. So, and lastly, I'll say this, Avery. In the heat of the pandemic, people were told, run out and get vaccinated. And, there were 3 different choices out there. You'd go to your doctor and say, well, which one I should take? Any of them. That's not good medicine. You have to, there are 3 different things. Like if I'm putting you on anti-cholesterol medication, I got to go through my due diligence and see which is the best one for you. If you're dying from thirst, yeah, you and I would both drink a glass of Flint water. It wouldn't be my first choice. It's not going to be any choice. But if it's that or dying, so we have to be clear with folks. Part of that comes from not expecting others to do it for us, but to tap into this world of information, and it's going to be hard to filter it because a lot of information, a lot of misinformation. But don't wait till the fire alarm goes off to try to figure out where the fire route and fire escape is. So we got to do better, and with platforms like this and shows like what you're doing, we are certainly doing that.
I appreciate that. Look, we got about 3 minutes. I want you to tell them where they can find everything. Dr. Christian Gregory. Dr. Gregory, just real quick plug, and I'll wrap it up.
I mean, if you tag my IG page and website, but there's so much going on right now. But the 3energy.com, there's a lot of more. We're not just an energy drink company. We're a clean fuel company. So there's a snack line, there's nutritional biscuit line, there's all kind of, there's a whole new farming movement. We have partners, we're doing acquisitions. This is something, pay attention, because in the next 6 months or so, we're going to be much bigger than Texas, but Texas is our roots. That's our launch pad. So we're not going to abandon you, but there's a lot of exciting things. So we say, stay tuned. In the meantime, drink your water, eat your vegetables, clean food, whole food, take good care of your mind, body, and soul, and let's look out for each other.
Hey, I appreciate your time, and you guys know how I end this. Always visualize your goals, and after that, accomplish those visualized goals. Got to get you back on. We got a lot of meat on the bone. Got to get back with you.
Take good care. Thank you so much, Avery. Stay strong and tell the family I say hello. Tell Foster I say hello as well.
Yes, sir. Shout out to Foster for making this happen, putting this together. I appreciate your time.
Good brother.
I'll be in touch.
Take good care. Peace, brother.
Yes, sir. You too.